Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart and forgotten corners of Nova Scotia, through isolated coastal villages, fog-choked highways, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying horror stories ever recorded. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Nova Scotia, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened when I was 32, living in a small coastal town in northern Nova Scotia that barely showed up on maps. I moved there after my divorce, chasing quiet, cheap rent, and the lie that isolation could fix a broken man. The town had maybe 300 people, most of them fishermen or retirees who spoke little and watched a lot. The ocean was always nearby, breathing against the rocks like something alive. And the fog, God, the fog, came in thick every night, rolling through the streets as if it belonged there more than we did. The locals warned me early. Don't walk near the cliffs after dark. Don't answer voices in the fog. They never explained why. At first, I thought it was superstition, old habits, small-town paranoia. But on my 3rd night there, as I stood on my porch smoking, the fog crept up the road, and I heard someone whisper my name. I froze, because no one in that town knew me yet. I told myself it was the wind, the ocean playing tricks, or my own exhaustion filling in gaps. But the whisper didn't fade. It lingered, curling through the fog like it had weight. "Ethan!" It came again, closer this time. I stepped back inside and locked the door, heart hammering, feeling ridiculous for being scared of sound and mist. Sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, I dreamed of standing on the cliffs, the fog below me shifting into shapes that almost looked human, mouths opening, calling upward. The next morning, I asked my neighbor, Mrs. Halverson, about the fog. She'd lived there her entire life. Her hands stopped moving when I mentioned the voices. "You heard it already," she said quietly. Not a question. I laughed, trying to lighten it. "So, it's a town prank?" She shook her head once. "That fog doesn't prank," she whispered. "It remembers." Before I could ask what that meant, she shut her door. That was when I noticed something carved into the wooden post beside her entrance. Names. Dozens of them. Some scratched out, and one freshly carved. Mine. I didn't knock on Mrs. Halverson's door again. Something about the way she looked at me, like I was already gone, made my stomach tighten. Instead, I went back to my rental and tried to convince myself the carving was a cruel coincidence. Ethan wasn't exactly a rare name. That logic held until I noticed the dates. Every name had a year carved beside it. Some went back decades, others were recent. Almost all of them ended the same way, with a shallow slash through the letters, as if someone tried to erase them but didn't quite succeed. That night, the fog came earlier than usual. By sunset, it was already crawling between houses, swallowing fences and street signs. I stayed inside, lights on, TV playing loud enough to drown out my thoughts. That's when the knocking started. 3 slow knocks from my front door. I didn't answer. Then came the voice. Calm, familiar, gentle. "Ethan, it's cold out here. You left the porch light on?" It sounded exactly like me. I backed away from the door, every instinct screaming not to respond. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might give me away. The voice outside sighed, almost disappointed. "You always ignore problems," it said softly. "That's why she left." That sentence hit harder than fear. No one there knew about my marriage, about how my silence ruined it. My knees felt weak. The knocking stopped. Minutes passed. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, moved across my porch and down the steps. I waited until the fog thinned slightly before peeking through the window. The street was empty, but the ground wasn't. Bare footprints pressed into the damp dirt, leading away from my house and toward the cliffs at the edge of town. They weren't deep, like a real person's. They looked light, unfinished, as if whatever made them didn't fully belong to this world. The next morning, the local news reported another disappearance. A fisherman named Lucas Bennett hadn't returned home. I recognized his name immediately. It was carved on Mrs. Halverson's post. Right below mine, Lucas Bennett's disappearance changed the town overnight. Boats stayed docked, curtains remained drawn. Conversation stopped the moment I entered a room. It was like everyone had silently agreed I was connected to what was happening, even if they didn't say it out loud. I went to the docks that afternoon, hoping to learn something, anything, about Lucas. His brother, Aaron, stood near an empty boat, hands shaking as he tied and untied the same rope over and over. I told him I was sorry for his loss. He didn't look at me. "It always starts with whispers," he said finally. "Then the fog shows you things you shouldn't see." I asked him what Lucas had seen. Aaron's jaw tightened. He said the fog wore our father's face, said it asked him to come closer, promised answers. That night, I dreamed again of the cliffs. This time I wasn't alone. Shapes stood beside me, half-formed, mouths moving without sound. And somewhere in the fog, something was practicing my voice, saying my name again and again until it sounded wrong. I woke up to fog pressing against my bedroom window, thicker than I'd ever seen it. It muffled sound completely, like the world had been wrapped in cotton. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. "Come outside." I deleted it immediately, but another came through. "You want to know why your name is there." I stayed in bed until sunrise, afraid that if I stepped outside, I wouldn't come back. When the fog finally lifted, I drove straight to the cliffs. I needed answers, even if they terrified me. Near the edge, I found a small memorial. Flowers, old photographs, rusted fishing hooks. Names were etched into the rock itself, barely visible beneath lichen and salt. Some were generations old. Mrs. Halverson stood there, waiting. "It learns people," she said without turning. "Watches them, waits for regret. Then it uses their voices to bring them home." "Home to what?" I asked. She finally faced me. "To the fog." Behind her, the mist began to roll in again, fast, hungry, and calling my name with growing confidence. I tried to leave town that same day. I packed my car, ignored the looks from neighbors, and drove toward the only highway leading out. Halfway there, the fog rolled in without warning, thick, fast, and unnatural. My headlights barely cut through it. The road signs disappeared. Then the engine stalled. That's when the radio turned on by itself. Static crackled, then cleared into my own voice. "You can't outrun what already knows you," it said calmly. "You never face things. You just leave." I slammed the radio off, hands shaking. When I looked up, someone was standing in the road. It looked like me. Same height, same posture, same tired slump in the shoulders. Its face was wrong, though, blurred at the edges, like it hadn't finished deciding what I was supposed to look like. It raised a hand, mirroring my movement exactly. Behind it, the fog churned with other shapes, watching. I locked the doors and screamed as the engine finally roared back to life. When I sped forward, The road was suddenly clear. But I knew the truth then. The fog wasn't trapping me. It was replacing me. I didn't stop driving until I reached the edge of town again. The fog followed at a distance, patient, like a hunter certain of its prey. I parked near my house and sat there, realizing escape had never been an option. Mrs. Halverson was waiting on my porch. "It makes a copy," she said. "Then it takes the original." She told me the only way to survive was to deny it what it wanted. Regret, guilt, unfinished business. Most people failed. They listened. They answered. They followed. But some, she added softly, choose. That night, the fog came for me openly. It flooded the street, climbed the walls, poured through cracks. My double stood at the doorway, clearer now, smiling with my mouth. "You're tired," it said. "Let me finish your life." I looked at it and felt something unexpected. Anger, not fear. "I will," I said, "but not as you." I stepped outside, not toward the cliffs, but into the heart of the fog, refusing to follow its script, and for the first time, it hesitated. The fog closed around me, cold and wet against my skin, whispering every mistake I had ever made. It spoke with voices I recognized, my ex-wife, my father, my own inner thoughts, each one trying to pull me apart. The copy watched, waiting for me to break. I didn't run. I said their names back. I admitted what I'd done wrong. I admitted what I was afraid of. The fog shuddered, its whispers losing rhythm, like a song played off key. The shapes around me blurred, some collapsing into nothing, others dissolving into drifting mist. My double screamed, not in pain, but in frustration. "You belong to us," it snapped. "You always did." "No," I answered, shaking but standing. "I belong to what I choose to face." The fog surged once more, then recoiled violently, as if burned. The copy's face cracked, features slipping away like wet clay. It staggered backward, melting into the mist. When the fog finally withdrew, the street was empty. And for the first time since I arrived, by morning the town felt lighter. The fog still came, but it stayed low, passive, like a thing that had been wounded. Mrs. Halverson's wooden post was gone. In its place stood bare, clean wood. I left Nova Scotia 2 days later. Months passed before I looked myself up online. That's when I found the article. A man with my name, my face, and my age had been pulled from the ocean near the cliffs. Weeks after I'd gone, identified, buried. I stared at the photo for a long time. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the fog outside my window, wherever I am. It doesn't call my name anymore. It uses others. Testing, learning. I know now it never wanted to kill me. It wanted to live as me. And somewhere in that coastal town, when the fog rolls in thick and heavy, there are still footprints that lead to the cliffs, but never back. Because the fog remembers the ones who almost became it. My name is Caleb Morrison, and this happened when I was 28, after I took a job restoring old homes along the southern coast of Nova Scotia. I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was chasing money. Heritage properties paid well, and abandoned houses were plentiful in dying towns where families had quietly disappeared over generations. The house on Harrow Bay Road looked perfect. 2 stories, white paint peeling like sunburnt skin, windows dark but intact. Locals called it unlucky, which usually meant cheap. The realtor wouldn't come inside with me. "People don't stay long," she said, standing by her car. "They hear things, feel watched." I laughed it off and signed the papers. The first night, the house was silent, except for the wind rattling the windows and the ocean groaning somewhere beyond the trees. I slept well. The second night, I woke up to the sound of furniture moving downstairs. Slowly, carefully, like someone was trying not to be heard. I lay still, listening. The sounds continued, wood scraping against wood, followed by a dull thud. My heart pounded, but I told myself it was an animal. Raccoons got into places they shouldn't. When I crept downstairs with my phone flashlight, everything was exactly where I'd left it. Chairs pushed in, table untouched, no signs of forced entry. Except the front door, it was unlocked. I knew I'd locked it. I always did. Old habit from growing up, broke and poor. That morning, I found muddy footprints near the back hallway. Bare feet, too large for a child, too narrow for boots. They led to the basement door, which I hadn't opened yet. When I mentioned it to my nearest neighbor, Tom Riley, his face drained of color. "It's not abandoned," he said quietly. "Not to them." "To who?" I asked. He looked toward my house, then away. "The ones who never left? The house doesn't like being alone." That night, as I lay in bed, I heard breathing beside me. Slow, patient, and not my own. I didn't move when I heard the breathing. I barely breathed myself. It was close. Too close. Coming from the space just beside my bed, where the wall met the floor, slow inhales, slower exhales, like whoever or whatever it was had all the time in the world. I turned on the lamp. Nothing. The room looked normal, empty, but the air felt thick, heavy, like I'd stepped into someone else's memory. I didn't sleep after that. I sat with my back against the headboard, light on, waiting for morning. The next day, I started work early, tearing up old floorboards to distract myself. Around noon, I found something wedged between the walls. Photographs. Old ones. Black and white. Families standing in front of the same house. Different decades. Same expressions. Tired. Afraid. On the back of one photo, a sentence was written in faded ink. "If we leave, it follows." That evening, I noticed something new. A second indentation on the mattress, right next to mine. I confronted Tom Riley that night. He didn't pretend anymore. "They tried to move on," he said. "Every family that lived there, fires, drownings, disappearances. Some left town, some didn't make it far." "What is it?" I asked. "A ghost?" Tom shook his head. "It's the house, or what the house learned from people." He told me the place had been built by a fisherman who lost his wife and children to the sea. They say he begged the house to remember them, to keep them close, and it did. That night, I heard voices. Not whispers, but conversations. Laughter, plates clinking. A family dinner happening in rooms I stood alone in. I followed the sound to the basement door. It was open now. Warm light spilled upward, and the smell of cooked food filled the air. From below, a voice called gently, lovingly, "Caleb, come eat. You're home." And the worst part? It sounded comforting. I didn't go down to the basement that night. I shut the door, locked it, and slept in my truck instead. Even then, I dreamed of the house. Dreamed of standing in the kitchen while unseen hands set plates on the table. Chairs scraping back for people who weren't there. The next morning, the front door was open. Inside, the house felt used. The air was warmer. The dust on the floor was disturbed. And the kitchen table, my workbench for blueprints and tools, had been cleared. 6 plates were neatly arranged. Old ceramic ones I'd never seen before. Each plate had food on it. Fresh, still steaming. I dropped my keys and backed away slowly. The walls creaked, not from age, but from movement. Subtle shifts, like a body adjusting itself in bed. Then the house spoke again, not from one place, but everywhere at once. "You stayed out last night," it said, gently reproachful. We worried. That was when I realized the house wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to keep me. I decided to burn it down. I bought gasoline, matches, and didn't tell anyone. As I poured fuel along the walls, the house reacted. Doors slamming shut, windows rattling violently, floorboards groaning like bones under strain. "You don't mean that," the house whispered. "You're angry. We understand." The voice changed, became my mother's. Soft, familiar, the one I hadn't heard since the funeral. "Caleb," it said, "you don't have to be alone anymore." My hands shook. The match nearly slipped from my fingers. That's when the photos fell from the walls, all of them at once. Frames shattered, glass exploded across the floor. The families in the pictures stared up at me, mouths open mid-scream. I lit the match. The flame flared bright, and then vanished. The gasoline soaked into the floor like water into soil. The house exhaled, satisfied. "You tried," it said kindly. "Now rest." The front door sealed shut, and something heavy settled into the space beside me, like an arm around my shoulders. Time stopped meaning anything after that. The windows no longer showed the outside world, only dim light and shifting shadows, like memories playing on loop. The house began adjusting itself around me. Walls softened, corners rounded. The air stayed warm, steady, comforting in a way that felt wrong. I started hearing routines. Footsteps every morning at the same time, a kettle boiling, chairs pulling back for dinner. If I stayed still and listened, it almost felt normal, almost peaceful. That was the danger. The house learned faster now. It stopped mimicking strangers and started copying me, my habits, my thoughts. When I tried to leave again, the front door opened, into the living room. When I smashed a window, it showed the kitchen. "You don't need anywhere else," the house said. "You belong where you're needed." I found a notebook on the dining table. My handwriting filled every page. Plans to renovate, to settle, to stay. Pages I had never written. At the end, one sentence was underlined deeply. "I accept this place as my home." The pen beside it was still warm. I understood then what the families in the photographs had faced. The house didn't trap you with force. It waited until leaving felt harder than staying. That night, the house prepared a celebration. Candles lit themselves. The table filled again. Laughter echoed, layers of it, overlapping decades. The walls pulsed softly like a heartbeat. "Just say it," the house urged. "Let us keep you." I walked to the basement instead. Down there, beneath the warmth and voices, the foundation was exposed. Old stone soaked dark with moisture. Names were carved into it, hundreds of them, each one deeper than the last. I added mine, but not as acceptance. I carved it crooked, angry, refusing perfection. Then I smashed the stone with a sledgehammer until my arms bled and the walls screamed. The house panicked, lights flickering, voices overlapping, memories collapsing. When I woke up, I was lying in wet grass. The house behind me was empty again, collapsed. For the first time in its history, I was found at sunrise by a passing fisherman. He said I was barefoot, shaking and staring at nothing. Behind me, where the house once stood, was a sunken pit of rubble and splintered beams, like it had collapsed inward under its own weight. The official report blamed age and rot. No one mentioned the names carved into the stones beneath the debris. I spent weeks in a hospital, then months trying to convince myself it was over. But the house didn't disappear completely. It followed in smaller ways. Rentals never felt empty. I'd wake up to the smell of cooked food, Chairs would be pulled out when I entered rooms alone. Worst of all, I started thinking the thoughts it had planted. How quiet felt unbearable, how warmth meant safety, how being alone was dangerous. One night, I caught myself whispering out loud. "You can stay," I said to an empty room. That terrified me more than anything the house had ever done, because it meant part of it had survived. And it was still learning how to live inside me. I don't restore houses anymore. I live alone, move often, and never stay anywhere long enough to feel settled. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear a familiar creak, floorboards adjusting, walls remembering weight. Last winter, I found a key in my coat pocket. Old, rusted, not mine. Attached to it was a small wooden tag with an address burned into it. Harrow Bay Road. I threw it into the ocean the next morning, watched it sink, told myself that was the end. But every time I close my eyes, I see rooms rearranging themselves. Tables being set, spaces being prepared. The house didn't need walls anymore. It learned what it wanted from the people who lived there. How to fill emptiness, how to turn loneliness into a door that never truly closes. And I know this with certainty now. Some houses don't haunt you. They wait. My name is Samantha Reed, and this happened when I took a summer job as a lighthouse keeper on the isolated Eastern Head Lighthouse in Nova Scotia. I thought it would be peaceful. Long walks along the cliffs, the steady rhythm of the ocean, quiet nights with the stars overhead, perfect for writing and escaping the city. The locals, as usual, had warnings. "Don't climb the tower alone after sunset," said an old fisherman at the docks. "It sees more than you think." I laughed. Superstition, I thought. The lighthouse was beautiful. Whitewashed stone, spiral staircase, a lantern room glowing faintly even during the day. I settled in, excited to finally have solitude. But the first night, as the fog rolled in from the Atlantic, I noticed something strange. A shadow in the lantern room, just out of sync with the light. I thought it was my reflection. Then it moved, slowly, deliberately, staying just behind me whenever I looked up the stairs. Something inside me tightened, a silent alarm that, whatever it was, it hadn't come to simply watch the ocean. The next morning, I told myself it was exhaustion or the fog playing tricks. The lighthouse was old. Shadows stretched in strange ways. That's all. By midweek, things became harder to ignore. Doors I had locked were found open. My journal, left on the table, sometimes had extra marks I didn't make. Scratches along the margins, like tally marks counting something. One night, I woke to a whisper. "Come see." It wasn't loud, but it was urgent. I froze. No one knew I was there. No boats came near the cliffs at night. I followed it, compelled. The spiral staircase loomed, and the shadow waited halfway up. It didn't move toward me. It didn't retreat. It just watched. I realized then the lighthouse itself seemed aware. Each gust of wind, each creak of timber, it was communicating through movement, sound, and subtle pressure. I was not alone, and I wasn't welcome. I tried to leave the lighthouse the next day, but the fog had rolled in thick, cutting visibility to a few feet. The path down the cliffs was slick, treacherous, and felt unnaturally long. I swear I heard footsteps behind me, following each step I took. But every time I turned, there was nothing. Inside, the shadow remained. It didn't move when I moved. It didn't react to light. It simply existed in the upper lantern room, its presence heavy, like a weight pressing through the walls. That night, I attempted to sleep on the ground floor, far from the spiral staircase. The whisper returned. "Why do you hide? I didn't respond. I couldn't. The voice sounded like my own, but slower, hollow, stretched. It was inside my head now, not outside. I realized, with a chill that froze my blood, that the lighthouse had learned my patterns. It knew when I slept, when I wrote, even the rhythm of my heartbeat. And it was patient, waiting for me to falter. The following day, I tried to keep busy, cleaning, polishing, and checking the lenses. But everything seemed off. Items I left on a table were shifted, brushes stood upright without support, and the logbook had entries I didn't remember writing. By evening, I was convinced someone, or something, was in the lighthouse with me. I called the Coast Guard on my radio, but only static responded. Then, amidst the white noise, a voice whispered over the crackle, "Don't call them. They can't see." I froze. My hand shook as I gripped the radio. The shadow moved that night. It descended the staircase slowly, stopping just below the railing. I could feel its gaze, heavy and cold. I understood then. The lighthouse wasn't just watching. It was communicating, shaping me, teaching me its rules. And I was already trapped within them. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, thick as liquid, with faint shapes moving just beyond the glass. By the fifth night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The shadow followed me into the kitchen area, hovering at the edge of the light. I froze, my pulse pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. Then it spoke, my voice again, slower and hollow. "You fear leaving. You fear the dark. You fear yourself." I tried to run, but the staircase seemed longer, the doors smaller. Every path I took led me back to the lantern room, where the shadow waited patiently, watching. I realized the lighthouse had learned more than my habits. It had learned my fears, my hesitations, my weaknesses. It wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to break me down, to teach me a lesson I didn't know I needed to learn. Hours passed. The fog outside pressed against the windows, whispering like a tide, urging me to submit. I knew that if I faltered, it would claim me, not physically, but something far worse. My mind, my essence, my certainty of who I was. I decided to confront it. I climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room, heart hammering, hands trembling. The shadow didn't move. It simply waited. "I'm not afraid," I whispered, though my voice shook. It tilted its head, mimicking me perfectly. "You are," it said again in my voice. "But you could learn otherwise." The lantern above flickered, bathing the room in uneven light. I stepped closer, daring to reach toward it. The moment my hand passed through where its shoulder should have been, the fog outside surged violently, pressing against the glass. The lighthouse groaned. Floorboards shifted. The walls seemed alive, breathing in rhythm with my heartbeat. Then, silence. The shadow didn't vanish. It smiled. Small, subtle, but unmistakably satisfied. I realized then that the lighthouse wasn't malevolent. It wanted a partnership, a keeper who understood its patterns, its intelligence, its hunger for presence. And unwillingly, I began to understand. By the seventh night, I could no longer tell if I was leading the shadow or if it was guiding me. Every step I took, every door I opened, seemed predetermined. Objects moved subtly to direct me. Chairs shifted, my coat appeared where I hadn't hung it, and the spiral staircase groaned at exact moments to slow my progress. The shadow began whispering constantly, layering my own thoughts with suggestions. "Go higher. Look closer. Stay. Learn." It was patient, intelligent, almost gentle. But the words burrowed into my mind, leaving small cracks I couldn't ignore. I tried sleeping again, but the lantern above flickered, shadows stretching long across the walls. I dreamed of the ocean rising, waves swallowing the lighthouse. Yet the shadow stood atop the cliffs, smiling at me, waiting. When I awoke, I noticed the stairs were different. A few steps were missing, replaced with smooth stone I hadn't seen before. And at the top, the lantern room glimmered as if it were alive, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. It wasn't just watching me anymore. It was shaping me. That night, I realized the lighthouse had learned to speak without words. I heard the ocean's roar, the wind, the creaking timber, not as natural sounds, but as instructions. Followed, obey, understand. The shadow mirrored my every movement, predicting me perfectly. I tried resisting, hiding, even leaving the lantern room entirely. But the house, or the lighthouse, adjusted. Doors I had left open would close, windows would fog over, and I would find myself back where it wanted me. It began to mimic people I knew. Faces from childhood, whispers of my mother, my best friend's laughter. The sound was comforting and terrifying, because I couldn't tell where my own thoughts ended and its influence began. And then it showed me something new. Reflections in the lantern glass. Not me, but dozens of versions of me, each standing silently, watching, waiting. The lighthouse didn't just want a keeper, it wanted a vessel. And slowly I understood I might not leave the tower alive or sane if I failed to learn its rules. The ninth night was the breaking point. The shadow no longer waited for me. It pulled me. The spiral staircase became a tunnel, the walls breathing in and out with every step I climbed. I felt the fog from outside press through the glass and seep into my skin. I reached the lantern room and froze. The shadow had taken shape. My own face, twisted in a way that was both familiar and horrifying. It smiled at me knowingly. "You understand now," it whispered in my own voice. "You belong here." I wanted to run, but my legs refused. Every instinct screamed at me to escape, yet every fiber of my mind was being rewritten, taught the language of the lighthouse. I could feel its pulse in the beams above, its rhythm syncing with my heartbeat. And then it touched me, not physically, but mentally. A surge of understanding, of belonging, of absolute connection. I realized it was not trying to harm me. It wanted me to become part of it. I woke up at sunrise on the spiral staircase, half dazed, unsure if I'd slept or merged with the shadow. The fog had cleared, leaving the ocean calm and deceptively peaceful. The lighthouse was silent, obedient, waiting. I left after that, but I never fully escaped. Even miles away, I could feel its pulse, its slow learning. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I'd hear whispers mimicking my voice, telling me what to do, how to move, what to fear, and I obeyed without realizing. I tried telling others about the lighthouse, but words failed. Everyone heard only my own voice, not the whispers. They didn't believe me. I know now that some places are alive, patient, and intelligent. The lighthouse didn't trap me. It claimed me, shaping my mind and my thoughts to its own rhythm. And I understand why the locals warned me. It watches, waits, and teaches. And once it chooses you, you are never truly alone again. My name is Ethan Calloway, and this happened when I took a weekend trip to a remote cabin deep in the woods of Nova Scotia. I had rented it through an old online listing, lured by the promise of solitude and the chance to reconnect with nature. The cabin sat at the edge of a dense pine forest, overlooking a small frozen creek. It looked charming in the photos, but in person, it felt off. The logs were gray with age, the windows fogged, and the door creaked even when it was closed. The locals in the nearest town avoided the area. "That place has ears," one man muttered when I asked directions, before hurrying away. I laughed nervously and chalked it up to superstition. The first night, I heard it. A faint whistle outside the cabin. Slow, deliberate, almost like someone testing the air. I assumed it was the wind moving through the pines. But the rhythm was too precise, too deliberate, and it seemed to follow me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. By the second night, the whistling had changed. It was louder, closer, and somehow inside the cabin. It echoed faintly through the walls, through the floorboards. I tried ignoring it, but every creak of the wood, every groan of the logs, seemed amplified. I searched the cabin thoroughly, every corner, every closet. Nothing. Only the faint, deliberate whistle. I began noticing small signs that someone, or something, had been there. A chair slightly moved, a cup I hadn't used on the counter, footprints in the frost outside the back door. When I opened the window to peer out, nothing but the dark trees and frozen creek greeted me. Then I heard it again, this time from inside the cabin. A voice joined the whistle, low and teasing, almost human. "Ethan." It called my name perfectly. I froze. My heart raced. I realized then the whistle wasn't random. It knew me. It was learning me. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the whistle returned. Low, measured, circling the cabin as if it were testing the walls. I swore I could hear it behind me, just out of sight, sliding along the corners of the room. By dawn, I discovered another unsettling sign. Scratch marks along the inside of the front door. Not deep, but deliberate. Someone, or something, had tested it. I remembered the locals' words. "That place has ears." I had laughed. Not anymore. The morning fog made the woods seem alive. Branches swayed unnaturally, and the creek bubbled in a pattern that matched the whistle. I tried to leave, but my truck wouldn't start. The engine groaned once, then died completely. I walked back to the cabin to find the cup I had left outside on the porch, now inside, filled with water that smelled faintly metallic. The whistle came again, closer, now perfectly aligned with my heartbeat. It was no longer a sound. It was a presence. I spent the day trying to fix my truck, but every attempt was thwarted. Wrenches disappeared, bolts loosened themselves, and the snow beneath the tires seemed unnaturally soft, swallowing my footprints. The cabin had become a trap. That night, the whistling returned, accompanied by soft thumps, like someone walking deliberately along the walls, pacing. I tried calling for help, but my phone showed only static. Even the radio emitted the same haunting whistle. I lit candles, thinking light might repel it, but the shadows stretched unnaturally long, bending toward me. Then I noticed the frost on the windows forming shapes. Faces staring directly at me. Each face whistled softly in unison, mimicking the sound outside. I felt surrounded, trapped in a living, breathing entity that had learned how to speak, to lure, and to terrify. By midnight, I realized something chilling. The cabin didn't just want me inside. It wanted me to respond, to play along. And I was already answering. By the fifth night, I realized the cabin wasn't just playing games. It was studying me. The whistling now had rhythm, echoing my footsteps as I moved from room to room. Every creak, every groan of the wooden walls matched my heartbeat, as if the cabin had synchronized itself to me. I tried to stay awake, writing in my journal, but the pages rearranged themselves while I wasn't looking. Sentences I hadn't written appeared. "We hear you. We see you. Stay with us." The shadows became more daring. They moved closer, brushing against the corners of my vision. I could feel them lingering over my shoulder when I read. When I slept, the whistling invaded my dreams, soft, coaxing, demanding my attention. By midnight, the forest outside seemed to pulse with the same rhythm. Branches tapped against the walls like fingertips, following the whistle's beat. The cabin had learned how to communicate, and I had no choice but to listen. I decided to confront it. I stepped outside into the thick fog, hoping that leaving the cabin would end the whistling. The snow muffled my steps, but I could hear it, perfectly clear, following me across the trees. "Ethan?" it called, soft and melodic, yet impossibly close. I turned, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure among the pines, not fully human, but humanoid, its head tilted unnaturally as it whistled back in perfect imitation of my own breath. I ran back to the cabin, slipping in the snow, and slammed the door shut. For a second, silence. Relief. Then the whistling returned, from inside the cabin. My cup rattled, the frost on the windows began moving like liquid, and the shadows stretched across the floor, converging toward me. It had found a way in. The cabin wasn't just alive, it had followed me, and I was trapped in its song. By the seventh night, the cabin's control over me became undeniable. The whistling no longer waited outside, it followed my thoughts. I would think of leaving, and it would echo inside my mind, coaxing me back to the cabin. Every attempt at escape failed. Paths through the snow seemed longer, the trees rearranged themselves, and every time I tried to run, I ended up back on the porch. Inside, objects moved with intent. Chairs slid slightly, doors cracked open, even my journal flipped to pages I hadn't written. And the whispers, now layered with the whistle, called my name constantly. "Ethan. Stay." It felt familiar and intimate, like someone who knew every secret I tried to hide. I realized the cabin didn't just want me inside. It wanted me to participate, to answer its call, to become part of its rhythm. I felt myself obeying, even as terror coursed through me. By midnight, the shadows danced along the walls, twisting into shapes that mimicked my own movements, mocking me, teaching me. That night, the cabin escalated further. The whistling became almost musical, layered with faint voices I recognized, friends, family, strangers, blended seamlessly into the melody. The frost on the windows began forming shapes, trees bending unnaturally, faces peering through the ice, hands pressing as if they wanted to reach me. I tried to resist, but each note of the whistle wrapped around me, embedding itself into my thoughts. My heart synchronized with the rhythm. My movements slowed, dictated by its silent commands. Then it whispered clearly, in a voice that was both mine and not mine. "Play with us, Ethan. Learn the song." I looked around. Every shadow, every corner, every crack in the floorboards seemed alive, moving subtly to draw me into the pattern of the sound. I realized the cabin wasn't just trying to scare me, it was trying to make me part of it. And deep down, I feared that if I resisted too long, it would consume me entirely. By the ninth night, I had lost track of time, or maybe the cabin had. Every moment felt stretched, measured by the whistle echoing in my mind. The shadows were no longer passive. They reached for me, brushing against my shoulders, tugging gently at my hair, whispering instructions. I realized then that the cabin had taught me its rhythm. Every creak, every groan of the logs, every movement of frost on the windows, all part of a symphony. I was no longer resisting. I was responding, almost instinctively. I tried running outside again, but the snow had shifted into a maze. Branches scratched at my face as if guiding me back to the cabin. And then I heard it, clear as daylight, inside my mind. Stay. Play the song with us. I felt myself obeying. My hands moved across the floorboards in rhythm with the whistling. My footsteps followed the pattern the shadows had created. And I understood, with absolute horror, that leaving was no longer an option. I awoke at dawn on the cabin floor, exhausted and trembling. The whistle had stopped, but the shadows lingered, faint and flickering in the corners. The snow outside was untouched, as if I had never left. But I felt different, changed. I left that day, abandoning the cabin entirely, and never returned. But I know it didn't let me go completely. Sometimes, at night, I hear faint whistling in my dreams, a rhythm my heartbeat now unconsciously matches. I see fleeting shadows in corners, subtle movements at the edges of my vision, and a pull in the wind that seems to beckon me back. The cabin doesn't just exist in the woods. It exists in me now. And I know that one day, if I am not careful, I will respond to its call again. Because the cabin doesn't just whistle, it waits. My name is Liam O'Donnell, and this happened during the summer I spent fishing the remote coastlines of Nova Scotia. I had grown up around boats, but nothing prepared me for the night I vanished from reality. I was alone on my small fishing vessel, drifting near the rocky shores of Cape Breton. The moon had risen full and silver, casting eerie reflections across the waves. The air was unnaturally still, the usual ocean noises, crashing waves, distant gulls, muted as if someone had pressed pause. Then I noticed it. A faint light flickering along the cliffs, far off, unlike any lighthouse I knew. At first, I assumed it was another boat, but the light moved against the wind, sliding across rocks with impossible precision. As I adjusted my binoculars, I saw figures on the cliffs, humanoid, pale, and unmoving. And then one lifted its head and stared directly at me. I felt an icy dread seep into my bones, a warning I couldn't ignore. I tried to move my boat closer, curiosity outweighing fear, but the engine sputtered and died. Silence enveloped me. The cliffs loomed like jagged teeth in the moonlight, the pale figures unmoving yet somehow watching. Then the water shifted. Not waves, but currents, unnatural and deliberate, swirling around my boat, keeping me trapped. My oars barely moved. Panic gripped me. From the cliffs, one of the figures raised its arm, pointing toward the open sea. I hesitated, heart pounding, unsure whether to obey or flee. Something in its gaze, hollow, calculating, made me feel both seen and invisible at the same time. I heard a whisper then, carried by the wind, soft yet commanding. Follow or remain. It wasn't human, not entirely. The voice matched no one I knew, yet it resonated inside my mind, clear as if it were my own thoughts. I realized then that my decisions were no longer fully my own. I followed the voice, unwillingly, letting the currents guide me farther from the shore. The cliffs grew distant, swallowed by mist rolling in from the horizon. The moon hung heavy and low, silver light shimmering unnaturally on the waves. I felt my boat move with a mind of its own, as if something beneath the water was steering it. Then the figures on the cliffs began to vanish, fading into the fog one by one. Only one remained, a pale shape, taller than any human, with glowing eyes that reflected the moonlight. Its gaze was fixed on me, patient yet merciless. A cold wind cut across my face, and I heard the whispers again, now layered with something else, a rhythmic tapping, like claws brushing against the hull. My heart pounded in my chest as terror and fascination wrestled inside me. I realized I I was drifting into a place that should not exist on any map. Somewhere between water and sky, between reality and nightmare, I called out, voice trembling. But the fog swallowed my words. The figure raised both arms slowly, and the water around my boat began to glow faintly, illuminating shapes beneath the surface, long, dark forms moving in perfect unison, circling the hull. I couldn't tell if they were fish, shadows, or something older, something alive that belonged neither to sea nor land. The whispers became louder, more insistent. Step closer, join us. I felt an irresistible pull, like the tide itself was commanding me. Fear battled curiosity, but I couldn't resist. My hands gripped the sides of the boat, my eyes locked on the figure. Suddenly, a beam of moonlight struck the water directly in front of me. Shapes rose, pale and humanoid, gliding toward the surface. The tallest figure stepped forward, and the water rippled unnaturally beneath its feet. I understood then that I had crossed a threshold, a boundary no human should ever breach. By the fifth night, or perhaps the fifth hour, I could no longer tell. Time had dissolved into the rhythm of the waves and the whispers. The pale figure guided my boat toward a glowing whirlpool, the water pulsing as if it had a heartbeat. The smaller shapes beneath the surface swirled faster, their movements synchronized, creating patterns I could barely comprehend. The whispers became voices, layered and distinct, echoing in my mind. They were not threats. They were invitations. Step closer. Become part of the tide. See what we see. I tried to resist, my instincts screaming, but my arms moved on their own. The oars dipped into the water, perfectly matching the current's pull. The tallest figure raised its arms, and the moonlight intensified, casting silver pathways across the water. The air was thick with electricity, and the horizon shimmered unnaturally. I realized then that this place was alive, intelligent, and infinitely patient. It was testing me, observing me, and I was already responding. The water beneath the boat began to shimmer, almost translucent, revealing shapes that were not entirely human. Limbs stretched in impossible directions, faces tilted unnaturally, eyes glowing faintly, and yet they moved with an eerie grace. The whispers became a chorus, echoing my own thoughts. Join us. We know the tide. We know the moon. We know you. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of the water, the boat rocking in tandem with the glowing pulses. I wanted to resist, to row away, but my hands moved like extensions of something else, something older than the ocean. The tallest figure stepped onto the water itself, defying gravity, moving toward me with impossible calm. The fog pressed closer, thickening into a wall that separated me from the shore entirely. It wasn't aggression I felt, it was expectation. The water, the figures, the fog, they wanted me to accept them, to become part of this impossible place. And slowly, I felt myself bending to their will. By the seventh night, or perhaps it was still the same night, the tallest figure had drawn closer, gliding across the glowing water as if it were solid. Its eyes locked on mine, pulsating with an otherworldly intelligence. I felt a surge of panic, but it was mixed with a strange fascination, a pull I could not resist. The smaller shapes beneath the surface began rising, their movements hypnotic. They circled the boat in perfect synchronization, forming patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. The whispers grew louder, now overlapping into a symphony of sound I felt more than heard. Step forward, join, become one. My hands trembled uncontrollably, but they obeyed, dipping the oars into the glowing water again and again. Every stroke matched the rhythm of the tide. Every breath synced with the pulsing glow beneath me. I realized with mounting horror that resistance was futile. The ocean, the figures, and the moonlight above. They were one entity, and it was pulling me into its rhythm, rewriting my reality. The tallest figure stopped just a few feet from my boat. Its eyes glowed brighter, reflecting on the water in a way that made the waves seem alive. I could see my own face mirrored in the water below, twisted in terror yet calm, obeying a rhythm I did not choose. The whispers now spoke as one voice, and it spoke directly inside my mind. You are part of us. Step fully into the tide and see. My limbs moved before I could stop them, dipping the oars in unison with the luminous currents, the water glowing brighter with every stroke. The fog thickened, wrapping the boat in an impenetrable wall. I could no longer see the cliffs or the distant shore. I was suspended in a world of glowing water, whispers, and shadows, a place that obeyed no natural law. And as the moonlight reached its peak, I understood the truth. The ocean had claimed me, and there was no turning back. By the 9th night, or whatever fragment of time it had become, I felt my mind fracturing. The water's glow pulsed in perfect rhythm with the whispers, the boat rocking gently as if it were alive. The tallest figure raised both arms, and the smaller shapes beneath the surface leapt higher, forming a halo of eerie silver light around me. I wanted to resist, to row toward the distant shore. But my limbs no longer belonged solely to me. Every motion, every breath, followed the tide's rhythm. The whispers were no longer merely voices. They were knowledge, urging me to surrender completely, to see the ocean as they did. I looked down into the luminous waves and glimpsed impossible things. Cities beneath the water, shadowy beings moving like currents, and a horizon that bent impossibly, folding sky into sea. And in that moment, I understood with terror and awe. I was no longer a fisherman. I had become part of something far older, far larger, and far more unknowable than myself. When I awoke, I was no longer near the cliffs. My boat drifted alone in calm, empty waters, the glow gone, replaced by normal moonlight. The fog had lifted. The shoreline was miles away, and I had no memory of how I got there. My oars were broken, my supplies scattered, but I was alive. Yet I felt different. The whispers still lingered in the back of my mind, faint but insistent. Sometimes I can hear them beneath the waves when I fish, soft and melodic, a rhythm that calls to me in the dead of night. I never returned to Cape Breton, but I know the tide remembers me. The ocean had claimed more than just my time. It had marked me. A part of me belongs to its rhythm now, and I know one day it will call me back. Because some waters are patient, and some whispers never end. My name is Hannah Mercer, and this happened when I was traveling through rural Nova Scotia for work. I had been driving all day along a lonely highway, searching for a place to sleep before the storm hit. The GPS had lost signal hours ago, and the only sign of civilization was a small, dimly lit motel tucked behind thick trees. I pulled in, exhausted, and was greeted by a woman behind the front desk whose smile didn't reach her eyes. "Room 7, she said simply, handing me a key without asking for ID. The hallways smelled faintly of mildew and dust, and the flickering fluorescent lights added an unsettling rhythm to the quiet. As soon as I entered the room, I felt an odd chill. The walls were too close, the bed too stiff, and the mirror reflected the ceiling more than me. I shrugged it off, attributing it to fatigue. But as I unpacked, I noticed subtle things. My suitcase appeared heavier, the shadows longer, and the hum of the heater sounded like faint whispers. That night, I woke to a faint scratching sound from the corner of the room. I froze, straining to hear over the storm battering the windows. The sound was deliberate, slow, almost impatient. My heart raced as I swung my legs off the bed and stepped cautiously toward it. The mirror reflected something that shouldn't have been there. A figure crouched in the corner, blurred and indistinct, as if the room itself was bending. I blinked, and it was gone. I convinced myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the storm and shadows. Then I heard it clearly. A voice, soft but urgent, coming from the air vents. "Hannah, you shouldn't be here." I tried opening the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I realized the hallway had shifted. The exit now seemed farther away, the walls closer, the lights flickering faster. The room was alive, and it was aware of me. By the third hour of that long, sleepless night, the room began changing in ways I couldn't explain. The bed seemed to shift closer to the wall, the mirror now reflecting corners that weren't physically there. I tried to document everything on my phone, but the images came out distorted. My reflection stretched, shadows bending around me in impossible ways. The scratching returned, louder, now accompanied by faint whispering that sounded like multiple voices layered together. "Hannah, stay," they murmured, almost coaxing, almost threatening. I backed into the corner, watching the shadows converge near the door, subtly moving, as if anticipating my next move. The heater rattled violently, throwing off heat in uneven bursts. I felt icy cold spots travel across the floor, circling my feet. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, yet the door remained firmly closed, mocking my panic. I realized with mounting terror, the room wasn't just haunted. It was sentient, learning my fears, testing my limits, and enjoying every moment of my desperation. By the fourth hour, the whispers became more insistent, echoing my own thoughts in a way that made me question reality. Every object I touched seemed to resist me. My suitcase lid snapped shut on its own, the clock spun wildly, and the TV flickered static images that resembled my own face, smiling grotesquely back at me. I approached the mirror again, and this time my reflection moved independently. It smiled when I didn't, tilted its head in mocking imitation, and whispered my name in a voice that sounded like mine, but wrong. I pounded on the door, screamed, shook the walls, but the room absorbed my energy, feeding on my fear. Every shadow lengthened, every creak of the walls amplified into a symphony of dread. And then I noticed the window. Beyond it, there was nothing but endless darkness. No moon, no storm, no highway. Just blackness, stretching infinitely, as if the room existed outside the real world entirely. By the fifth hour, I had lost all sense of time. The lights flickered in a rhythm that felt synchronized with my heartbeat, and the room seemed to stretch and contract around me. Every step I took was met with subtle resistance, the floorboards creaking unnaturally, walls seeming to lean inward, narrowing the space. The whispers became clearer, almost chanting my name, pressing into my mind. "Stay. Stay. Stay." I tried to leave, but the door refused to budge. Panic clawed at me, yet the room responded to my fear, feeding off it. The mirror no longer showed my reflection. It displayed moments from my past, twisted and distorted, scenes I had long tried to forget, all staring back at me as if mocking my very existence. A cold draft brushed past my neck, carrying a faint metallic scent, and I realized the room had learned my fears, reading my thoughts as if they were written on the walls themselves. I was trapped in a nightmare that was alive and aware. By the sixth hour, The room escalated its torment. The shadows no longer stayed in corners. They advanced subtly, curling along the floor, following my movements. Objects shifted when I wasn't looking. The bed swayed as if it had weight on it. The curtains rippled though the window was closed, and the air grew thick, almost tangible, pressing against me like an unseen hand. I attempted to write down everything, but my pen moved on its own, sketching shapes and symbols I didn't recognize, letters forming words in a language I couldn't understand. The whispers became urgent. Look, listen, accept. The voice sounded like mine, yet not mine, and each repetition burrowed deeper into my mind. Then I noticed the clock. Hours had no meaning anymore. It spun backward, forward, then stopped entirely at midnight. The room existed outside time itself, and I was entirely within its control. By then, I understood the terrifying truth. I was no longer just a guest. I was a part of the room. By the 7th hour, the room became overt in its manipulation. The shadows now moved independently, forming vague humanoid shapes that seemed to mimic my every action. I turned, and one shadow reached toward me, its fingers stretching unnaturally long, brushing the air just above my shoulder. I recoiled, but the shadow mirrored my fear, twisting its form in grotesque delight. The mirror now showed multiple reflections, my face in panic, my face smiling, my face screaming silently, all at once. I could hear the whispers layered together, overlapping voices calling out my name, recounting my darkest secrets, and predicting my next moves. Every word I tried to speak was swallowed before it left my lips. The walls pulsed rhythmically, as if breathing with a sinister life. I felt the air thicken with invisible pressure, constraining me, forcing me to bend to the room's will. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the room had rewritten the rules. My mind, my body, my senses, all belonged to it now. By the 8th hour, the room escalated further, invading every sense. The floorboards now hummed beneath my feet in a frequency that made my stomach churn. The whispers had merged into a single voice that sounded intimately familiar, my own voice. But speaking words I hadn't thought aloud. You belong here. You always did. The window that once looked onto the highway now revealed endless black void, punctuated by faint glowing eyes staring back at me. My bed shifted again, tilting slightly, as if testing my balance. The heater rattled violently, and from it came a soft, scratching sound, like nails tracing symbols onto the walls. I realized the room wanted more than my fear. It wanted submission, a full surrender of reality. My hands twitched uncontrollably, moving objects, adjusting the bed, aligning the furniture according to some invisible, malevolent order. I understood then with absolute clarity. Resistance was meaningless. The room had claimed me, and my mind was no longer my own. By the 9th hour, I could no longer distinguish between the room and my mind. Every corner, every shadow, every flicker of light seemed alive, watching, reacting. My reflection in the mirror had multiplied into dozens, each one whispering secrets I had never told anyone, each one mocking me. The walls pulsed violently, and the room seemed to stretch upward infinitely, the ceiling dissolving into darkness. The whispers became deafening, a cacophony of commands, temptations, and threats. My hands moved on their own, picking up objects, rearranging them, following a rhythm I could neither understand nor resist. I realized then the horrifying truth. I was not just trapped. I had become part of the room. My fears, my memories, my very consciousness were feeding it, giving it life. The door no longer existed. The hallway no longer existed. Only the room remained, eternal, sentient, and merciless. I wanted to scream, to break free, but my voice had been absorbed, becoming just another layer of its whispers. When I finally awoke, I was lying on the floor, exhausted, as if hours or days had passed in a single moment. The room appeared normal, the lights steady, the windows showing the highway outside. The front desk was gone, replaced by empty silence. But I knew the truth. The room had left its mark. Sometimes, at night, I feel it again. The pulsing walls, the whispering shadows, the mirrors showing me twisted versions of myself. I can't explain how, but the room exists within my mind now. I feel its presence even in other spaces, faint but undeniable. I never returned to that highway. I never stayed in a motel again. Yet I know it's waiting somewhere, patient and sentient, ready for the next traveler who is foolish enough to knock on its door. Because some rooms aren't meant to be checked out of. My name is Ethan Callahan, and this happened during the winter I spent as a temporary lighthouse keeper on a small, isolated island off the coast of Nova Scotia. The storm had been relentless, battering the rocks with waves taller than any building I'd ever seen. The ferry had dropped me off at dusk, and by nightfall, the wind was howling like a chorus of unseen voices. The lighthouse was ancient, its walls thick and cold, the spiral staircase creaking under my weight. I had been warned by the regular keeper, who left for the mainland the previous evening, that the island had a history of strange disappearances and unexplained phenomena. I laughed nervously, attributing the stories to local superstition. But as I ascended to the lantern room, the wind shifted, carrying whispers that seemed almost human, almost urgent. I froze. The light above flickered, and in its glow, I thought I saw movement along the jagged cliffs, shapes too tall and angular to be human. A chill ran down my spine. I realized I was not alone. That first night, the whispers grew louder, carried on the wind into the lantern room. At times, they seemed to mimic voices I knew. My father, old friends, strangers, but always distorted, hollow, and mocking. I tried to dismiss it as the storm playing tricks on my mind, but every instinct screamed that something was watching me. The light above me flickered violently, and shadows began stretching along the stone walls, bending unnaturally. I could hear footsteps echoing on the spiral staircase, though I was alone. Each time I descended to investigate, the sound would vanish, leaving only the sound of the wind and the crashing waves. By the second hour, I noticed the cliffs below. Shapes moved among the rocks, tall and pale, emerging from the mist, circling the lighthouse as if marking it, observing me. My heart pounded, yet I couldn't look away. Their presence was magnetic, terrifying, and undeniable. I realized then that my isolation was no accident. The lighthouse had chosen me. By the third night, the island had become a living nightmare. The wind carried voices that seemed to seep directly into my thoughts, whispering secrets I had never spoken aloud. The spiral staircase groaned under phantom footsteps, echoing as though the entire lighthouse were alive. Every shadow moved of its own accord, twisting and elongating in impossible ways. I tried to focus on routine tasks, checking the lantern, cleaning the glass, logging weather observations. But each glance out the windows revealed the cliffs below crawling with pale figures. They moved with unnatural grace, scaling the rocks without hesitation, disappearing into the mist only to reappear moments later in different positions. One figure, taller than the rest, stared directly at me with eyes that glowed faintly in the stormy darkness my breath caught. I knew then that it wasn't merely watching, it was waiting, patient and deliberate. Fear wrapped around me like the wind, chilling me to the bone. I realized survival would depend on understanding this place before it claimed me entirely. By the fourth night, the storm intensified, and with it, the island's oppressive presence. The lantern light began flickering, its rhythm syncing with my racing heartbeat. Each flash revealed the figures on the cliffs shifting, no longer distant. They were closer, defying the scale of the island itself. I descended to inspect the lower floors, only to find the hallway distorted. Doors appeared where none had existed before, and the stone walls subtly pulsed as if breathing. The wind outside carried whispered warnings. Do not leave. Do not look. Join us. My rational mind screamed that it was impossible, but my senses told another story. The lighthouse itself had become a trap. At one point, I looked at the logbook I had been maintaining. The pages were filled with writing I did not remember making. Cryptic symbols, elongated letters, all pointing toward the cliffs. The tallest figure appeared at the top of the staircase, its glowing eyes fixed on me, patient and eternal. I understood with dread that the night had only begun, and the island would not release me willingly. By the fifth night, the storm had become deafening, pounding against the lighthouse as if it sought to break it apart. The tallest figure had descended from the cliffs, standing at the base of the spiral staircase, impossibly still despite the wind's fury. My body trembled uncontrollably, yet I felt compelled to descend toward it, drawn by some invisible tether. The other figures moved closer, silent, gliding across the rocks like shadows given form. Their eyes glimmered faintly, and I realized with horror that they weren't entirely human. They were elongated, pale, and their movements defied the laws of nature. The wind carried their whispers, repeating my fears, twisting my memories, forcing me to relive every regret and terror I had ever known. I stumbled down the stairs, tripping over steps that seemed to extend endlessly beneath me. The lighthouse no longer felt like a building. It was a conduit, a threshold between the world I knew and something far older, far darker. I understood then that the island wanted more than my presence. It wanted my submission. By the sixth night, the boundaries between the lighthouse and the cliffs had blurred entirely. The pale figures now moved inside the building, though I had no memory of them entering. Their limbs stretched unnaturally along the walls and ceiling, and their whispers infiltrated my mind directly. You belong here. You see what we see. I tried to flee, running toward the lantern room, but the spiral staircase spiraled infinitely, folding back upon itself. Every step I took led me back to the same point, the tallest figure waiting patiently, unblinking. I could feel the cold radiating from it, seeping into my bones, slowing my movements, bending my thoughts. The storm outside seemed to answer its presence. Waves crashing higher, wind howling like a chorus of tortured souls. I realized the lighthouse was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a cage, and the figures were its guards, patient and eternal. I had crossed into a domain where nature and nightmare merged, and I had no hope of escape. By the seventh night, the figures were everywhere, their presence inescapable. They no longer needed the cliffs or the wind. They had infiltrated every corner of the lighthouse. Shadows twisted into humanoid forms, stretching across walls and ceilings, their glowing eyes following my every move. I could hear the whispers inside my mind, repeating, chanting, "You are one of us. You see what we see." I tried to climb higher, to reach the lantern room and restore some sense of control. But the spiral staircase now descended as much as it ascended, folding into impossible angles that defied physics. My body moved against my will, my legs climbing steps I couldn't count, each echoing with phantom footsteps, not my own. The tallest figure appeared at the top of the staircase, motionless yet commanding. Its gaze burned into me, and I realized with terror that the storm outside was now subordinate to it. The island, the lighthouse, and these beings were one entity, and I was already part of its design. By the 8th night, my mind began fracturing. The whispers had become unbearable, overlapping with my thoughts, dictating actions I could not resist. My reflection appeared in the lantern glass, but it moved independently, smiling, tilting its head, mocking me. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching to touch me, pressing against my body with invisible weight. The tallest figure descended the final few steps, its gaze unyielding. The others had formed a ring around me, their elongated forms swaying in rhythm with the lantern's flickering light. I realized with growing horror that this was not just observation, it was ritual. The wind outside screamed in unison with their whispers, waves crashing with the power of 1,000 storms. The lighthouse pulsed with energy, each flicker of light synchronized to my heartbeat. Resistance was futile. I was no longer merely Ethan Callahan. I had become a participant in something older, something eternal and infinitely patient. By the 9th night, I was utterly consumed by the island's presence. The figures advanced, yet never touched me, their mere proximity warping reality. The spiral staircase had vanished entirely, replaced by a stone ramp spiraling into the void above and below simultaneously. I could hear my own heartbeat, but it was joined by another, slow, deliberate, echoing, belonging to the island itself. The tallest figure stopped directly before me, its glowing eyes boring into mine. A whisper filled my mind. See through us. Become us. Join the eternal tide. I felt my consciousness splintering, pieces of myself drawn toward the figures, toward the lighthouse, toward the storm. I tried to resist, shouting, screaming, clawing at the walls. But my voice was absorbed into the wind, my movements mirrored by shadows that were not my own. The lighthouse pulsed like a living heart, a beacon for something ancient and unyielding. I understood, in the deepest corner of my mind, that survival was no longer possible. I had crossed the threshold. When dawn finally broke, the storm had ceased. The lighthouse appeared normal from the outside, its weathered walls untouched. I was alone, or so I thought. My reflection in the lantern glass now stared back at me with a calm, hollow expression that was not entirely mine. The figures were gone, but the whispers lingered, faint yet unyielding, like a pulse beneath my skin. I left the island as soon as the ferry returned, but I knew the truth. The lighthouse had not released me. It had marked me, and a part of me remained with it, tethered to the island, the cliffs, and the storm. At night, I sometimes hear whispers in the wind, see shadowed figures in peripheral vision, and feel a subtle tug, an invitation I cannot resist. Some places are not meant for men, and some storms are eternal. I survived, but I carry a piece of the lighthouse with me. It waits. As our journey through Nova Scotia's darkest corners comes to an end, we've seen that terror can take many forms. From the restless ocean claiming a lone fisherman, to a sentient motel room feeding on fear, and the ancient lighthouse that traps the souls of those who dare approach. These stories remind us that some horrors are real, patient, and eternal. The landscapes of Nova Scotia are breathtaking by day, but at night, they hide secrets that ordinary eyes cannot perceive. Whispers carried on the wind, shadows that move of their own accord, and places that exist beyond the boundaries of time itself. They all linger in the corners of our minds long after the night ends. If you feel the chill of these tales tonight, remember, They are not just stories. Somewhere out there, the waves crash, doors creak, and shadows wait for the next unwary soul. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.